It's a weird time to be a Battle Angel fan. The problem with a lot of anime adaptations is the people in charge just don't see these characters resonating with Western audiences unless they change them up in some drastic way. Goku can't be a naive, cheerful man-child. Let's make him moody and hypersexual. Yeah, audiences relate to that much more. I thought normal was overrated. We can't have Motoko struggle to fit into the greater whole of society only to give up her most human qualities at the end. Being an individual is awesome, yo! See, something like Ghost in the Shell is made for Japanese people. Its themes and characters are particularly relevant to Japanese society. It's an examination of their culture, not ours. That's why westernizing it with a message that panders to a Western audience effectively breaks Ghost in the Shell, on top of the whitewashing and tone deafness, and why it was always only going to be an okay movie, not a great one. To its credit, at least the Death Note movie does something with the changes. The original Death Note is a critique of Japan's overly harsh justice system. Hiring a lawyer in Japan is really just a formality. Light punishes people without hesitation, arrogantly viewing himself as a force of justice. So with the Netflix movie being set in the US of A, they decided to make this version of Light a critique of American foreign policy. Our intervention in other countries, our gung-ho attitude, Light thinking he can just get rid of all the bad guys and not foreseeing easily foreseeable consequences is the smartest thing about this pretty stupid movie. And you know what? Good on them for doing that, for at least trying to reinvent it in an actually somewhat poignant and inspired way. But Battle Angel isn't like Ghost in the Shell or Death Note. It doesn't have their baggage. It doesn't have a lot of these elements that Western audiences need to see through some sort of filter to appreciate. At its core, Battle Angel is a more universal story with universal values. It so easily lends itself to other cultures already that adapting it should be super easy by comparison. They shouldn't need to change it up like they did to Ghost in the Shell, and for that reason alone, I'm pretty hopeful about this movie being good. But it also isn't like Ghost in the Shell in that it's not mainstream. Nobody knows what Battle Angel is except for Battle Angel fans. This isn't one of those deals where there are fans, non-fans, and then a pretty broad third category of people in the middle who have at least heard of it and might be curious, but just have yet to check it out. You either know about Battle Angel because you've checked it out and ended up loving it, or you've never even heard of it. This is why so many people know next to nothing about it, just finally hearing about it now. And so, because it's such an unknown, the trailers give newcomers a less than flattering impression. Without a frame of reference to go by, they can only take what they're given now and draw conclusions from that, and understandably, people are creeped out by it. Not just by the eyes, but how generally doll-like Alita herself looks, which is kinda the point even in the comic. Some fans have brought up how they'd be better off recreating her big pouty lips, something characters in the comics tease her for, her funny octo lips. But let's be real, that would be a terrible idea. With people already saying she looks like a sex doll come to life, giving her a mouth like she had in the comics would make her look even more like a literal blow-up doll. Yikes. But that's the word I see popping up. Creepy. Creepy movie. Battle Angel is creepy. Alita is creepy. James Cameron is creepy for suggesting the eyes. You're creepy for liking this. Point is, people are judging this movie, and the series that inspired it, pretty harshly, prompting lifelong fans like me who were strongly impacted by the story to damage control. What's most discouraging to me is seeing people already writing this series off as a trashy, by-the-numbers, nothing-to-it, born-sexy yesterday kind of story. I don't exactly blame them for getting that impression, given what little we can glean from the trailer, but just telling them to go read the manga won't help boost their confidence in this case since this trope is extremely common in Japanese media. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, Born Sexy Yesterday is a trope that panders to men in a pretty skeevy way. You have these women in movies, say Lilu in The Fifth Element, who may as well have literally been born yesterday but has a sexy adult body. Mentally, emotionally, she's a child. And there are a lot of movies featuring women like this, who might be good at fighting or even unfathomably wise according to other characters, yet are still very much childlike in nature and dependent on the unremarkable men in their lives to be their teachers, their guardians, their anchors to the world. This gives those male characters an undeserved level of power and control over them that, let's be honest, a lot of guys in real life would surely exploit. A lot of guys would love to be in that position, to have this physically sexualized yet totally innocent and unknowing babe just fall into their lap that would be pretty easy to take advantage of, to manipulate into doing whatever you want them to do. You see how creepy it is? How predatory that is? These types of stories, as great and profound as they may be otherwise, pander to spineless weirdos who for the life of them just can't satisfy a real woman who could be considered their equal psychologically, because women are so demanding, their standards are too high. But if someone born sexy yesterday comes your way and you're the first guy she meets, you're already the most wonderful, intelligent guy in the world to her, and she's ready to hang on your every word like you're a wizard despite not doing anything noteworthy in your life. It makes guys feel important. It feeds them what they want to hear. That they shouldn't be expected to improve themselves. That surely there's someone out there made just for them, with standards just low enough to settle for their lame ass. And to anyone who asks, well, what's wrong with a message like that? It's silly, that's what. People are sick and tired of that narrative. Women especially. And to be fair, Battle Angel undeniably begins from the same starting line a lot of these stories do. In truth, Alita is hundreds of years old, with an intense backstory that we don't see any of for a long time and is still being fleshed out now. But because of the way the story is structured, we first meet her after she almost dies and wakes up with amnesia, effectively pushing the reset button and reincarnating her as an innocent, childlike being dependent on her rescuers to look after her. This is common with the trope. But here's the thing that sets this series apart. It doesn't stay that way. In stories that unapologetically follow this trope to a T, we're usually meant to identify with, say, Corbin, Bruce Willis's character. He's the audience surrogate, and we're getting to know Lilu, Mila Jovovich's character, with him. She becomes the object of our affections and desires, just as she is for him, because Corbin is us. Lilu is separate from us. We aren't meant to connect directly with her much, merely observe her through Corbin's eyes. Battle Angel is a complete opposite in this regard because we aren't meant to see her that way. We aren't meant to only see Alita through the eyes of the men in her life. She is the audience surrogate. The whole amnesia thing in this case works to help us empathize with her because we're seeing a lot of the crazy messed up happenings in the scrapyard through her eyes, and we share her authentic reactions of shock and disgust to these things that she and we are seeing for the first time. The story is structured to encourage us to identify with her, not with the man who pulled her out of a junk pile or the boy she quickly develops a crush on, though we can also do that. And the series does acknowledge very quickly that, yes, these men in her life, specifically Ito, do foster a pretty messed up power dynamic, and not in that weak sauce tongue-in-cheek lampshading way where it's like, yeah, we know this is weird, but we're still gonna let it happen, we're not really going to address it. This story actually goes somewhere with it.
I want to be a hunter warrior too.
Don't be stupid! You don't know what you're saying! I didn't give you limbs to do things like this. You don't have to work. All you have to do is be beautiful. If you want money, I can...
This isn't about money! This is something for me!
This is for you?
Yes! Tonight I felt something new. Like I was really alive for the first time.
You don't know what you're saying! I don't want you soiling your perfect hands with blood!
Do you think I'm some doll for you to play with?
Often in this type of story, an outburst like this is ultimately just lip service, and it isn't long before these women realize that the man in their life is all they really need and stop resisting them, throwing away whatever silly ambitions led the poor girl astray and becoming complacent. If this were that kind of story, it wouldn't be long before Alita came to her senses and found her way back into her master owner's arms. And they even briefly flirt with the idea that things might go that way. But this proves to be a red herring as Ito does ease up and respect her need for autonomy. I mean, duh, not that he should have a medal for it. It isn't long before she lives on her own, getting by splendidly and becoming an inspiration to many in the scrapyard who dream of one day having the complete control over their own lives as she has over hers. And then just for good measure, the author pulls a fast one on us and further shakes up Alita's life in big ways that irreparably alter the power dynamics, and it really is for the best. You see, the movie soon to be released only covers the first 4 volumes of the comic, more so the first 2. This is just one short-lived chapter of Alita's life. That romance they're teasing in the trailer, yeah, that doesn't last. At least in the source material, Hugo, the boy she falls in love with, he's just a kid, and she's kind of a kid, and neither of these immature people know what they're doing. They take things too fast, and of course it ends with tragedy. The comic isn't asking, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a perfect girl like Alita in your life? It shows why that wouldn't work. Even that corny "I'd give you my heart" line fills me with confidence because they seem to be directly foreshadowing one of my favorite moments in the story where, spoilers, Hugo is critically injured and dying of blood loss, so Alita removes his head, connects it to her own circulatory system to keep his brain alive, and rushes him to Ito's lab to be attached to a robot body like hers, and he is traumatized when he wakes up. Sure, she's used to living this way, but she underestimates how much of a shock it'd be for him, and he basically goes insane and goes and gets himself killed. That's the kind of crazy, beautiful cyberpunk stuff we're dealing with, and I hope to God they don't water it down in the movie, but I'm pretty sure they won't, even if it's only PG-13 and the scrapyard looks a little cleaner than it should. Like I said, this is just the first few volumes of the manga, almost a self-contained miniseries in itself. And if that's all Battle Angel was, with a sitcom ending where the status quo never really changes and Alita settles into her role, then yeah, people being dismissive of the series for being a born sexy yesterday story would have something of a leg to stand on. But again, it doesn't stay this way. This isn't a trite story about a young, naive woman finding her way into some lonely man's life and enriching it because she can't get by on her own. It's about Alita being liberated from that life, and that starts in the next stage of the series. Volume 5 is where things go down and the story completely changes, for the first of many times. Much of the scrapyard is destroyed and Alita leaves it forever, making her first steps into a wider world and a wider universe, eventually liberating herself completely at the end of the first series. We got to 10 years later, and in just that time, Alita's already changed a lot. She's more experienced, more independent, more capable, more knowledgeable of the world around her and how to interact with people, has a stronger sense of self and a more textured and filled out personality, everything you could want in a woman protag, really. She even meets another guy named Figure who becomes her new love interest, and with the dynamic between them being a little more equal at this time in her life, turns out they're great for each other. So yeah, I have no doubt some of you listening probably wish the upcoming movie just skipped her days in the scrapyard and started here instead, to weave around any potential Born Sexy Yesterday vibes completely. But I'm mostly fine with it being the way it is because we get to see how much Alita grows. It's important to see Alita start from rock bottom, from the literal pits that is life in the scrapyard, so we can see her move up in the world. If she starts the story already well off, we don't see as much improvement. But even then, she isn't perfect. Even when she finds Ito after not seeing him for years, it's clear that things can never go back to the way they once were, for several reasons, even if there is some small part of her she has to bury that wishes they would. There's even a weird Freudian dream she has when a guy with psychometric powers tries to read her mind, and as a result she fantasizes that she's on an operating table, Ito performing maintenance on her open chest with a comforting fatherly smile, and Alita's response is downright freaky. In that moment, she clearly enjoys being in that helpless position and tells Ito to take me apart some more, like she's nostalgic about it. And then she wakes up. Yeah, wasn't that gross? Feelings are complicated, and often uncomfortable to sort out. People having dreams like that is actually pretty common in real life. It's creepy, but it's a relatable kind of creepy. And it's not like the comic is framing this as ideal, as a state she should want to return to. It's just acknowledging that, yes, Alita's upbringing and weird relationships have left her with a lot of weak points in her armor. Like, of course they have. And don't get me wrong, there are uncomfortable moments, like legitimately problematic ones, but seeing how she deals with this stuff, how she pushes through or at least bides her time is fascinating. Heck, more spoilers, I almost forgot about this. There is even a part in Volume 9 where Alita's brain gets hacked into by a bad guy, and an alternate dream-induced version of the series' first chapter plays out where Alita didn't gain independence, and we get to see clear as day how the Battle Angel series would have gone if it was just a Born Sexy Yesterday story about a cute little doll bringing joy to the men who saved her from scrap like people say, before she snapped out of this delusion back into the much better story we've actually been reading. You see how smart this comic is? How deftly it dances circles around this trope? It's amazing. Alita is a very flawed and complex person who frequently questions her worldview, re-examines her priorities, and even has several psychological breakdowns. But she always manages to come out of it better and stronger than before. She is incredibly resilient that way. I'm autistic, and I relate to this strongly. There were many times throughout my teen years, and even a few after, where it seemed like I was regressing, retreating into myself, saying no to the world, taking a step back, only to come out of it by taking 2 steps forward. And this, I think, is vital to understanding why this character is so appealing to people. It's not because they want her to be their waifu. It's because her struggles are our struggle. For those of us who have been reading this series since we were pretty young, people like me, we connected with Alita because she was like us. She was indeed this confused person who didn't know jack about a world where it seemed that everyone was insane except for her. It's an Alice in Wonderland type of deal. Now tell me, how many of you haven't felt like that growing up? Really? And that's what Battle Angel is. It's about growing up, and she does grow up in about as much time as it took for us to. Here we are now, 28 years later, I'm only 26, with the comic still going, and Alita continues to change. She's a completely different person than she was at the start, the type of person you would want to lead you by the hand through a scary time. A typical Born Sexy Yesterday narrative makes the woman someone that any Joe in the audience could control with a little coaxing, but as the comics continued, any hint of a dynamic like that being feasible is completely flipped. Now she's the one that we'd have no choice but to answer to and seek guidance from, should we find ourselves in her scary world. It's kinda disillusioning and overwhelming, but that's good. It means she grew up just like we did. Her priorities changed, her sense of self changed, and what a journey it's been. I think it's gotten to a point where I can't see the character in a sexual light, even when she's clearly drawn that way, because of that familiarity. Does that make sense? I think this speaks of how much of an impression this character leaves over time. Alita has done some pretty terrible things throughout her previous life, and she messes up frequently in her new life. She stumbles a lot. She's done things that she's still working to atone for to this day. And she will, even if it takes a while longer. After all, the comic isn't over yet. It's just entered the final phase of a trilogy. That's why I'm willing to give this movie a chance. I was freaked out by the eyes too the first time I watched the trailer. Of course I was. This is something we've never seen done before. But the effect has grown on me. Funny thing, Avatar was just a training wheels for a Battle Angel movie. JC wanted to be a part of one since 2000 when he read the comics himself, but he knew the technology wasn't there, so he waited and gave us Avatar to see if people were ready to handle entirely CG characters and giant sky cities and whatnot. A lot of the set pieces and backgrounds in that movie look like they were pulled straight out of Battle Angel's second series, The Last Order. But for better or worse, Avatar did so well that he'd apparently be stupid to work on anything else. And for a while there, it sounded like we wouldn't get to see this movie for decades, if ever. At least until Avatar 2 and 3 were finished. Watching Elysium was kind of fun for me because it did at times feel like I was watching a Battle Angel movie, seeing places like the scrapyard and Ketharis on the big screen. It was so similar, in fact, that I worried once Battle Angel finally released, people would say that's ripping off Elysium. Cameron may not be directing it anymore, but Robert Rodriguez is working with a script that JC wrote himself. It would have been a 6-hour movie, so Rob trimmed off some of the fat, probably most of the motorball stuff, and JC liked his treatment enough to give him the reins, so I'm hoping it doesn't change too much. Framing is everything with a story like this. What sounds good or bad on paper can come across completely differently on the screen, and I hope Rodriguez doesn't miss the mark. Remember, the key to making the story work is us identifying with Alita herself by making her struggle our struggle, not with the men who found her by framing it around their feelings towards her. It can acknowledge those things, as the comic does, but that shouldn't be what drives the story. Alita is. And as long as they get that part down, I have high hopes for this to be that one manga adaptation that finally gets it right. This is my favorite comic book ever made. Please, please don't fuck it up. Toodles, stay gold.